You've got something on your face.
Mom!
Way to go, Jake! Good job, buddy! You got this! Go, Slugger! Yeah!
Mom!
Did you brush your teeth? Did you really brush your teeth? Let me smell your breath.
Mom!
Okay, Jake, honey, this is the only thing I can find, all right?
Mom!
Yeah, it's a compound fracture.
I'm sorry, sweetheart. You're gonna be okay.
Mom?
Well, you have a good set of crutches?
Seriously, Jake, what am I going to do with you?
Mom.
Hi, Jake.
Hi.
Ooh, she's really cute.
Mom. Mom?
Not a chance. I left all that behind.
Mom.
Jake, sit up straight, honey.
Mom.
Mom! Mom!
Mom?
Hi, you look so handsome. I'm so proud of you. You've got something on your face.
Mom.
Morning, everybody. Hey, to all the ladies in the room, happy Mother's Day. We are very grateful for you. I was talking to somebody after the first service when we showed that video, and I'm a total sucker these days, so everything chokes me up. That choked me up. And it was just a reminder that the days go slow and the years go fast, and before you know it, right, so much has changed. And ladies, what makes you so amazing is that you're faithful through all of those years, for all of our bumps and bruises and needs and counseling sessions and all of that stuff. If the gentlemen in your life haven't told you this, we'd be a hot mess without you. And so, as Pastor Kyle said earlier in the service, you know, whether you have children or grandchildren or great-grandchildren, or maybe you're an aunt, maybe you're someone who's never had children of your own, but you're a mother figure to someone, and you are such a blessing to us. And so a happy Mother's Day to you. A couple of things here after the service. Number one, for all the ladies, we're going to have a carnation for you, so feel free to grab one of those on the way out the door today. Also, at the top of the lobby in the Nook, we have a Mother's Day family photo booth. And so if you brought family or friends and you want a picture, hey, we got the photo booth for you. Snap a picture and remember this moment. And then I snuck away during the announcements today because between services, we had some bagels and cream cheese. And so I wanted to double check to make sure there are bagels left. There are, okay? So feel free to grab some on the way out the door. And there you go. You can enjoy a little extra carby goodness here on your way home from church today. So I want to begin this morning's message with a question, and this is a very short question. It's just 2 words, but it is a profound question because it's a question that pretty much everybody asks. Here's the question. What if? Okay, by show of hands, how many of you have asked this question before? What if? Okay, my guess is all of us have asked this question before. This is the kind of question that we ask when we're traveling a lot and one of our flights gets delayed and we're trying to make a connection. And what do you ask? You go, well, what if I miss my connecting flight and I get stranded at the airport? What if? This is the question that you ask when you're working kind of a high-powered job that's also a high-stress job because you got clients and contracts and commissions, and you're worried that maybe one of those contracts won't come through, so you ask the question, what if I don't get the contract and I don't get the client and I don't get the commission? What does that mean for my job? What if? This is the kind of job that you ask, or this is the kind of question that you ask when you're interested in someone and you want to date someone and you go on a date with somebody and you really like them, but you ask, what if they don't like me? Or maybe the date didn't go well for you, but you're kind of worried about them, and so you ask, what if they do like me? What if? Sometimes a little bit more personally, this is a question that we ask of ourselves. What if I don't have what it takes? What if I get to the end of my life and I feel like a failure? What if? And on Mother's Day, of course, this is a question that every mom in the world asks about her kids, right? Especially when they're out just a little too long and they're out just a little too late. What do moms begin to ask? What if they're not okay? What if they're hurt? What if they're wounded? What if they're lost? What if they're in trouble? What if? You ever asked that question before? So right now at Zion, we're in the middle of a series. It's called Peace of Mind, and we are taking a look at some of the major topics of mental health in our 21st century society. And so we've talked about things like depression, we've talked about loneliness, we've talked about anger, and this weekend, as we continue our series, we're going to be tackling the topic of anxiety. Now, here's what you need to know about anxiety right up front. Anxiety begins with a short, sweet, and simple two-word question. You know what the question is? What if? And the problem is, when you ask this question, sometimes you don't get an answer to this question, and you begin to feel anxiety. Now, before I tell you how you can deal with anxiety, I got to take you back in history a little bit. I got to take you all the way back to the year 1446 BC. Because in the year 1446 BC, there lived a man, very famous man in the pages of the Old Testament. His name was Moses. Now, Moses was Jewish, but he didn't grow up in the nation of Israel. He actually grew up in the empire of Egypt. And Moses kind of had a bit of a problem. Because when Moses was first born, the empire of Egypt was enslaving the people of Israel. And so Moses was born as a slave. But the king of Egypt at this time, the Pharaoh of Egypt, he was a little bit worried about all of these Jewish slaves because even though they were slaves, they were strong and they were scrappy. And Pharaoh began to worry that they were becoming just a little too big for their britches and a little too powerful for his empire. He began to worry. He began to experience some anxiety that maybe these Jewish slaves were going to stage a rebellion against his empire. And he got so anxiety-ridden because of this that he issues an evil edict. Here was the evil edict. He commanded and demanded that every single Jewish boy born was to be thrown into the Nile River and drowned. It was a terrible edict. And Moses was born as a Jewish boy right in the middle of this edict in the empire of Egypt. And so, by all accounts, Moses' birthday should have been his last day. But Moses had a scrappy mama, and everybody needs a scrappy mama. Because Moses' mama decided that she was going to obey the edict, kind of. She was going to put Moses in the Nile River, but she wasn't going to drown him in the Nile River. She was going to place him in a basket and float him down the Nile River. And when she did that, he was found by none other than the daughter of Pharaoh herself. And the daughter of Pharaoh raised Moses as her own son. And so Moses goes from being a kid who was almost killed by Pharaoh to growing up in the household and in the palace of Pharaoh, where Moses lives an incredibly charmed life until one day. Because as Moses grows, he begins to realize and notice that he doesn't look like all the other Egyptians in the palace. And so he kind of wonders about this, and he does a little bit of research into his background, into his heritage, into his ancestry, and he begins to realize that he's not Egyptian at all, he's Jewish. He's part of the people that the empire of Egypt are oppressing. And this unsettles him so much, it angers him so much that one day he goes out to the slave fields where he sees an Egyptian soldier who is beating a Jewish slave, and he kills the Egyptian soldier, and in that moment, Moses' life changes in an instant. Because Moses goes from living in the palace and being a royal son to being a fugitive on the run. Moses has to get out of Egypt. He actually travels about 250 miles southeast into a desert region known as the Sinai Peninsula. There he meets this pretty girl. Her name is Zipporah. Moses marries Zipporah, and Moses gets a job from Zipporah's father. He becomes a shepherd in the Sinai Peninsula. And this is where we're going to pick up Moses' story today. Exodus 3, beginning at verse 1. Now Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, and he led the flock to the far side of the wilderness in the Sinai Peninsula to a place called Horeb. Now, I want to pause right there and just kind of situate you here for a second. Here's a map, okay? And you'll see that Mount Horeb is kind of in the southern region of the Sinai Peninsula. And then here's a picture of Mount Horeb, okay? Mount Horeb is not exactly like a retreat type place. In fact, it looks like just a giant pile of dirt. This is quite literally where Moses is with this flock of sheep. This is quite literally the middle of nowhere. But it turns out, back to Exodus 3, verse 1, that the middle of nowhere, this pile of dirt that's a mountain, is actually nothing less and nothing other than the mountain of God. God is there. Because, verse 2, there the angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames of fire from within a bush. Now, at first, this doesn't look especially spectacular. It looks like kind of a brush fire off in the distance. But Moses notices this brush fire. He begins to watch this brush fire, and he begins to notice something strange about this brush fire. He sees that even though this bush was on fire, it doesn't seem to be consumed. It never seems to burn up and burn out. It just keeps burning and burning and burning. Finally, Moses gets so curious that in verse 3, he says to himself, I had to go over there and check that out. Something seems wrong. This seems very strange. There is this bush that burns, but it does not burn up and burn out. And when Moses goes over to the bush, that's when he hears the voice of God. God calls to him from within the flames of the bush, "Moses, Moses," God says. And Moses responds, "Here I am." Now, I got to tell you, I love Moses' response here. Here's why, okay? Moses is puzzled and a little unsettled by a burning bush, a bush that is on fire and burns, but it doesn't burn up. However, Moses, even though he's unsettled by a burning bush, he seems completely comfortable with a talking bush, right? The bush literally starts talking to Moses, and Moses goes, "Yeah, here I am." And it's at that point that the bush figures he should probably introduce himself. And so the bush does. Verse 6, he says, "Just so you know, I'm God. And by the way, I'm the God of your father. I'm the God of your ancestors, and you're right. You're not Egyptian, you are Jewish, so you got ancestors like Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, all sorts of famous people from the Old Testament. And here's what you need to know about these people. These people are my people." Verse 7, "And I've seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I've heard them crying out because of their slave drivers. And I am concerned. I got a problem with their suffering." Now, here's where God kind of drops the hammer on Moses. Because God says to Moses, "I got a problem here, and I need you to fix it for me. So, Moses, I got a mission for you. Go. I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt." Now, God in this moment gives to Moses a mission. Here's the mission. I want you to go back to the place from whence you came. Go back to Egypt, and I want you to go into the most powerful empire in the world, and I want you to march up to the most powerful person in the world, Pharaoh, and I want you to say to him, "Let God's people go." Now, it's right here that we begin to see inside of Moses just a little bit of anxiety. Because Moses, Moses has a few questions about this mission. Verse 11, Moses says, "God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt?" Or another way to phrase this question, What if? By the way, you ever asked that question before? What if? What if I'm not the right guy for this job? And God says, oh, don't worry about that. I'll be with you. But Moses isn't through. He has some more questions. He continues, verse 13. He says, God, what if? By the way, you ever asked that question before? What if I go to the Israelites and I say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they say, well, we'd like to know more about him. Like, what's his name? What should I tell them? And God says, I got an answer for that. Don't worry about that. Here's my name. I am who I am. Now, this is one of the coolest names for God ever. And here's the reason that this name is so cool. And really, here's the reason it's so important. So often, okay, we want God to be somebody like custom made for us. We want God to be the kind of God who will make us rich. Or we want God to be the kind of God who will make us happy. Or we want God to be the kind of God who hates all the same people that we do. But what God does is he says none of that is true. Because my name is not, I am who you want. My name is, I am who I am. Which means you're not going to be able to manipulate me. And if anybody asks, this is what you're supposed to tell the Israelites. I am has sent me to you. But Moses still isn't through. That didn't quite do it for Moses. Moses still has some questions. Like in Exodus 4, verse 1, what if? By the way, you ever asked that question before? What if? They don't believe me or listen to me and say, the Lord didn't really appear to you today? What if? You know, I think if we're super honest with ourselves, if we were in Moses' shoes, we'd be asking all the same questions, right? We'd have a ton of questions that start with, what if? What if I go to Pharaoh and he doesn't listen? What if I try to rescue the people of Israel out of the empire of Egypt and they don't follow? What if, like, I'm in the middle of the desert. I haven't had anything to drink. What if all of this is a mirage that's brought on by dehydration, right? What if none of this is real? What if? This is Moses' question. This is Moses' anxiety. And if we're honest, anxiety is something that strikes you and me too. So here's the question. What do you do? What do you do to get over all your what ifs? You know, kind of the classic Christian answer to anxiety is something like this. If I feel anxiety, I pray. Which, by the way, I do. Do you guys pray when you feel anxiety too? And there's nothing wrong with this. In fact, this is one of the things that we're commanded to do by the Bible. Philippians 4, verse 6, don't be anxious about anything. Here's the antidote to anxiety. In every situation, by prayer and petition, present your requests to God. And here's the reason prayer is so powerful when you're facing anxiety. One of the psychological tricks that anxiety plays on you is it gets you to talk to yourself. And it gets you to talk yourself into the worst case scenario every single time, which is why you become so anxious. And so let's say you're a little bit anxious about, losing your job. What do? You ask a what if question. What if I lose my job? And then you start talking to yourself and you give yourself the answer. Well, if I lose my job, then I won't have a paycheck, which leads to another question. Well, what if I don't have a paycheck? You start talking to yourself, you give yourself an answer. Well, if I don't have a paycheck, then I'm not going to have any income and I won't be able to pay my bills. Well, that leads to another question. What if I can't pay my bills? Well, if I can't pay my bills, then I won't be able to pay my mortgage, which leads to another question. What if I can't pay my mortgage? Well, if I can't pay my mortgage, then I'm going to be evicted from my house, which leads to another question. What if I'm evicted from my house? Well, if I'm evicted from my house, then I'm going to be on the streets, and that's a dangerous place to be, and someone is going to come and kill me, and in 30 seconds, you go from a job that you might lose to being dead on the side of the street. That's what anxiety does. When you talk to yourself, you talk yourself into the worst case scenario every single time, which is why prayer is so powerful. Because here's what prayer does. It invites you to stop talking to yourself and start talking to God. Because quite frankly, he's a lot better at dealing with your anxiety than you are. He has better responses to your anxiety than you do. 1 Peter 5, verse 7, cast. Now the temptation here is to carry. We want to carry our anxiety. But 1 Peter says do the exact opposite. Don't carry it, cast it. Give it over to God. Because he cares for you. And that's what prayer invites you to do. To give all your anxiety to God. But this leads us to another what if question. And the what if question is this. What if I pray? What if I try this? And my anxiety doesn't go away? What do I do then? So I'm going to give you a little bit of insight into pastor psychology. One of the most anxiety-inducing moments in a pastor's ministry is when he receives something called a call. Now let me explain what a call is. A call is just kind of like a fancy spiritual term for a job offer. And every once in a while, a congregation will issue a call to a pastor. And here's the thing. If the pastor is currently serving at a congregation, he has a call from God. But if another congregation calls him, that means that he has not just one call from God, he has two calls from God. That's what the church believes and teaches. Now, let me just kind of be honest with you about this. Having one call from God is plenty, right? Having two calls from God, that's where things can begin to get stressful. And so about 3.5 years ago, I got a call from Zion Lutheran Church in Walberg, Texas. And here's the thing, I was very excited, and I was also, anxious. Because you know what I started to do immediately? I started to ask all the what if questions, right? What if I move to Walberg and I don't like it? Or what if I stay and I miss this great opportunity? Or what if we move and my wife Melody, she didn't have a job at the time. What if she doesn't get a job? Or what if we stay and I never get another call again? And all these what if questions started swirling around in my head until I had kind of like an anxiety attack moment. Here's how it went down. My wife had sent me to H-E-B to go pick up some bananas. And I get to the parking lot, and I'm thinking about all these questions, and I'm praying to God, and I'm saying, God, I just need you to tell me what I should do. Come on, I need you to come through. And the answer from heaven seemed very fuzzy at that time. And so sitting there in my truck, I realized that I couldn't get out of my truck. I was kind of like breaking down. And I started crying. The next day, I was so concerned about how I was feeling, I called a counselor friend of mine. And he said to me, yeah, Zach, when you experience a big decision like this, that a lot of times leads to anxiety, you should probably call a doctor and see what they can do for you. Now here's the thing. I'll be very honest. I called the doctor because I respect this guy, but I didn't want to. Because in the back of my mind, I was thinking this. I don't need a doctor. Here's what I need. I need an answer, right? I need an answer from God. God, give me a sign, paint it in the sky, send me a text, give me a burning bush, just give me an answer, and that answer will be the antidote to my anxiety. But God wasn't giving me an answer. And it was driving me nuts. One of the fascinating things about this story of Moses and the burning bush is that when Moses asks questions, God gives answers. He gives lots of answers. Back to Exodus 3, verse 11, Moses says, who am I, God, that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? What if I'm not the guy for the job? And God immediately has an answer. Verse 12, he says, you don't got to worry about that. I'll be with you. But Moses isn't through. Exodus 3, verse 13. What if I go to the Israelites and I say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask me, what is his name? What should I tell them? And God says, I got an answer for that too. My name is I am who I am. If anybody asks, just say, I am has sent me to you. But Moses has another question too. Exodus 4 verse 1, Moses says, what if they don't believe me? What if they don't listen to me? What if they say the Lord did not appear to you today? And God says, oh man, I'm glad you asked that question because I got a cool answer for you. Watch this. What's that in your hand? And Moses says, well, it's my staff. All right, here's what I want you to do. Throw it onto the ground and watch. Moses throws it to the ground, and just like that, it becomes a snake. Isn't that cool? And then God says to Moses, now here's what I want you to do. I want you to reach out your hand and take that snake by its tail, to which Moses responds, it's not in the text, but I'm sure he said this, come again? I mean, talk about anxiety, right? God says, no, I got this. Trust me. So Moses reaches out. He takes a hold of the snake, and just like that, it turns back into a staff. And then God says, listen, if nobody believes you, just do that. And they'll believe that I have appeared to you. Moses gets an answer for every single question he asks in his anxiety. God answers every single question. You know how Moses responds at the end of all those answers? Here's how Moses responds at the end of all those answers. Exodus 4 verse 13, please send somebody else. Because it turns out that in reality, answers aren't actually the answer to anxiety. So we're kind of back at square one. If answers aren't the answer to anxiety, what is? Like how do we deal with anxiety? How do we navigate our way through anxiety? All right, before we get to the answer, let me lead you down a little theological rabbit hole here, okay? There's an interesting slip in the story of Moses and the burning bush in Exodus 3. Here's what I mean. In Exodus 3 verse 2, when Moses first sees the burning bush, it says that the angel of the Lord appears to Moses in flames of fire from within a bush. And so Moses, he's having this supernatural encounter that is actually this angelic encounter. Moses is seeing this angel of the Lord. But then if you fast forward just 2 verses, in verse 4, it's not an angel who begins to talk to Moses. It's God himself who begins to call to Moses from within the bush. And this creates kind of a question in this story, which is this: who's in the bush? Is it an angel, like the angel of the Lord, or is it God? Now, here's the thing. You can kind of square the circle by saying, well, they were both in the bush, right? The angel was in the bush. God was in the bush. After all, it kind of makes sense. The angel of the Lord is going to be with the Lord. The angel of the Lord is going to be with God. But if you read the story carefully, it almost seems like it's deeper than that. If you read the story carefully, it almost seems and feels like the angel of the Lord isn't just with God. It almost seems and feels like the angel of the Lord is God. Like they're one and the same. Now, what kind of an angel is that? Now, here's what's fascinating about this angel of the Lord. This isn't the only time he shows up in the pages of the Old Testament. He shows up all over the pages of the Old Testament. I'll give you one other example. This one from the book of Genesis. In Genesis, we meet this woman named Hagar. Now, Hagar gets pregnant and she's kicked out of her house. She's sent into the desert to essentially die while she's pregnant with her baby. Talk about an anxiety-inducing moment for any mom. And as Hagar is freaking out and melting down, you know who appears to Hagar? Genesis 16 verse 7, the angel of the Lord appears to Hagar. He finds her right there in the desert. And the angel of the Lord strikes up a conversation with Hagar. And he says, hey, listen, I know you're worried. I know you're concerned. I know you think you're going to die, but you're not going to die. You're going to see your pregnancy through, and you're going to give birth to a son. And this conversation is so comforting and consoling to Hagar that by the end of the conversation, she believes that she hasn't just seen an angel. She believes that she has been talking to God. At the end of the conversation, she says to the angel, you are the God, not just the angel, but the God who sees me. And so again, this kind of begs the same question as we got with Moses. Like who's appearing to Hagar? Who's appearing to this woman? Is it an angel or is it God? Now again, you can kind of square the circle and you can say, well, they're both there, right? The angel of the Lord is clearly with the Lord. The angel of the Lord is clearly with God. But Hagar believes something other than that. She believes something deeper than that. She believes the angel of the Lord is not only with God, she seems to believe the angel of the Lord is God. What kind of an angel is that? So, there's this great line. If you grew up in church, you probably know this line. It comes to us at the beginning of the Gospel of John, John 1, verse 1, the very opening line in John's Gospel. In the beginning was the Word, and by the way, the Word is a nickname that John uses for Jesus. And so when John says, in the beginning was the Word, what he's saying is, in the beginning was Jesus. Now, Jesus was most certainly with God, just like the angel of the Lord. But it was deeper than that. It was more than that. Jesus wasn't just with God. Jesus actually was God. Which is why for 2,000 years now, the Christian church has been teaching that the angel of the Lord actually wasn't an angel at all. The angel of the Lord was Jesus. I want to show you a quote from a guy named Irenaeus. Irenaeus lived in the 2nd century. He was actually the guy who brought Christianity to France. And Irenaeus talks about Moses and the burning bush and the angel of the Lord. And here's what Irenaeus says. He says, the Son, that's Jesus, was the one who spoke to Moses in the bush. Now, here's the thing. If Irenaeus is right, and spoiler alert, I think he is right, here's what that means, because it means something profound for anxiety. It means that to Moses, when he was all anxious about going to Pharaoh and telling Pharaoh to let the people of Israel go, to Moses appeared Jesus. And to Hagar, when she was all anxious about dying in the desert, to Hagar appeared Jesus. What this means is that Jesus appears in the most anxiety-inducing moments in history. And if Jesus is there with those people and their anxiety, you know what that means? It means that Jesus will be with us and our anxiety too. And here's what that means for me and for you. It means that the ultimate answer to anxiety is not an answer. The ultimate answer to anxiety is a person. And as long as Jesus is with you, here's what you need to know this morning. If you remember nothing else, here's what you need to know. As long as Jesus is with you, anxiety is something you can really get through. Because he is more powerful than your anxiety. So when I had my little anxiety attack in my truck, couldn't get out, go buy bananas. As I'm kind of feeling bad for myself and holding a pity party for myself, I get a phone call from a buddy of mine. It's out of the blue. I do pick it up, and he says, "Hey, I'm just checking on you. How you doing?" And I answer him very honestly. I say, I don't know. And then he follows it up because he can tell I'm a little stressed out. He says, well, are you okay? And I give him the same answer. I don't know. And we have this conversation, and at the end of the conversation, he prays. And you know what? It really does help me feel a little bit better. Because just like Philippians says, prayer really is a good antidote to anxiety. And I hang up the phone, and I'm still kind of feeling sorry for myself, but it's been, an hour and a half. Melody's wondering what's taking so long with the bananas. And so I finally look up, and in the H-E-B parking lot, this is what I see. It was so breathtaking, I had to take a picture of it. Nice sunset, huh? There's this great line from a poem from a 19th century English poet. Her name is Elizabeth Barrett Browning. And she writes a poem about Moses in the burning bush. And here's what she says. Earth, if you look for it, earth is crammed with heaven. And every common bush is afire with God. That sunset on that evening was my burning bush. Now, the burning bush did not have an answer, okay? Wahlberg was not written in the clouds. I was living in San Antonio. San Antonio was not written in the clouds either. But I did know the one who painted that sunset. And what that sunset reminded me of was this. Whether I stay where I was at or whether I was to go to a new place, Jesus was going to be with me. And that gave me release from my anxiety because it was no longer like this big crisis. It was just a choice because either way, God was going to be with me and he was the best answer that I could have in that moment of anxiety. And so here's the question. Is that true for you too? Because if it's not, if you're still struggling with anxiety, I just want to wrap up this message real practically. And I just want to give you 2 things that you can do, just very briefly, very quickly, if anxiety is something that you're going through. And the first thing you can do is this, okay? If you're all anxious inside and you're filled with what ifs, just call a friend. Don't be like me and wait for a friend to call, okay? You pick up the phone and call a friend. And just talk to them about what you're going through. And let me give a piece of advice to you if you're on the receiving end of that phone call, okay? If somebody wants to talk to you about their anxiety, the temptation is going to be this, to try to give them answers, right? To say, here's what you need to do, here's how you'll get through. Don't do that. Don't do that. I know it'll be tempting, but don't do it. And here's why. Psychologically, all right? Anxiety is often a function of insecurity. Do you know this? And insecurity is what leads us to ask all those what-if questions. You do something really bad, you feel really guilty about it, you feel lots of shame about it, and what do you start doing? You start asking what-if questions. What if somebody was to find out? What would they think of me? Would they reject me? Would they dislike me? Would they stop loving me? Sometimes it's not something bad you did. Sometimes it's just like something that you can't do that you wish you could do. This is true especially for guys. It's true for gals too, right? But there's that one thing that you really think you ought to be able to do. And your pride tells you, I can do this. But then you try it and you realize you can't do it. And all of a sudden, that little bit of insecurity, raises up all these what-if questions inside of you. Like, what if people knew that I couldn't do what I'm supposed to be able to do? Would they make fun of me? Would they laugh at me? Here's the problem with giving answers to insecurities. Answers don't sound like answers. They actually sound like dismissals. even if you give the best answer in the world, a lot of times here's what it sounds like. Oh, come on, what are you so worried about? Stop being a baby. Your insecurity, it's kind of dumb. It's no big deal. That doesn't sound like an answer. That sounds like an attack. So don't give an answer. Just listen. Because that's the best gift you can give them. And so that's the first thing you can do if anxiety is something you're going through. Just call a friend. And then here's the second thing you can do. And I know you've tried this, and I know you've done this, and I know you've prayed, but just keep calling on Jesus. Just keep calling on Jesus. Here's why that's something I want you to do, okay? One more story. It's Mother's Day, so I got to tell a story about Mama. When I was a kid, one of the things that kind of induced anxiety in me was the dark. I think this is a pretty typical kid thing, right? When the lights went off in my bedroom, my anxiety level went up, which meant that bedtime was always kind of an interesting time. Because my parents would put me into bed and they tuck me into bed, they turn off the lights, right? And I had this closet in my bedroom. I still remember this. It slid shut, but it didn't slide all the way shut, which meant there was this little dark crack that looked even darker when my room was dark, and I was waiting for something to jump out of there and get me. And so night after night after night, my parents would try to put me to bed. And they'd lay me down and they'd turn out the lights and, give it 2 to 5 minutes, and I'd be out of my bed and in their bed. And I'd say, Mom, Dad, I can't sleep. I'm scared of the dark. Anybody else do this as a kid, or am I the only one? Okay, I'm the only one. Great. Talk about anxiety. I'm feeling it right now. Okay? And the funny thing is, my parents were in bed too, and you know where they wanted to stay? In bed. So what did they try to do? Well, they tried to give me answers. Nothing in your closet's going to jump out and get you. Your room looks exactly the same in the dark as it does in the light. The only difference is how much light is in there. They gave me all the answers. Did any of the answers help with my anxiety? Yes or no? No, because answers never do. And so finally, after going round and round and round, it was almost always Mom who would get up, and she'd walk me back to my bed, and she'd tuck me back in, and she would just sit on the side of my bed. Give it 5 minutes, I was out. Because when I experienced that kind of anxiety, I didn't really need an answer. I needed Mom. So Mom, thank you. I know you want an answer. But can I invite you to believe this? If you're really struggling with anxiety, what you need more than an answer is a person. And here's the thing, Jesus has all the answers, but he doesn't promise all the answers. You know what he does promise? He promises to be with you. He'll sit on the side of the bed with you. And you know what? That might just be enough when you're feeling anxiety. And so lean into that. Grab hold of that. Take hold of him. And here's what you might just find. In your anxiety, you might just find peace of mind. We all need more of that. Let's stand and pray. Heavenly Father, this world leaves us with lots of questions. They all start with what if. And sometimes we call out to you and we want all the answers. Father, thank you that you did better than an answer. You sent us your Son. May we cling to him and all that he has done, and we ask this in his name. Amen.